I think I'm gonna like this series quite a bit. Because I don't know how many of you Shibits actually realized, but there was some very distinct references throughout this entire episode that threw me for a loop. Because it took a moment for it to click into my head that this series' characters, the entire cast, is a reference to famous writers. I have the entire cast here. I'm just going to go through the names because I don't want to mess up the names. But all these characters, every single character in this episode, all the main characters, are famous writers. The one I knew instantly, right off the top of my head, I don't even need to look it up, Dazai. Dazai, I have actually reviewed his work in the past. No Longer Human. This series is a fantastic series. In my top 5 favorite manga series I have ever read. It is a wonderful and dark series. This writer has a very, very tragic backstory. And I have to say, when I saw the character introduce himself as Dazai, and I saw his last name, the emotions that welled up inside of me at that moment was insane. But the overall atmosphere of when this character revealed his name was very dark. I love the background and the atmosphere and the way the character was shown, because it really suited this writer. And that gets to the main point I'm getting at. All the characters, every single character in this episode, even the main character, they're all named after famous writers, and their ability is named after one of their most famous works. For instance, Dazai, he's named after, or his ability is No Longer Human. You get to see it in this episode. His ability is No Longer Human, and his name is Dazai. And here you go. Here's his fucking work. No Longer Human. So, it's incredible to see that this series is doing references like that. But then, let's go through some other ones. The other characters, like, Kunikita. You also have Miyazawa. Now, Miyazawa I know about as well. I've seen a little bit of Miyazawa, and I've seen it here and there. And to see Miyazawa also in this, I was like, oh, shit. But then there was one that really threw me for a loop, and I was like, yo, okay, Dazai, that's one thing, but another one that really got me was Edogawa Ranpo. Now, I feel like many might know this name more than Dazai, because Ranpo is actually very recent in everyone's mind, because there was an anime that came out recently called Ranpo. I even reviewed some episodes of it. Now, regardless of what I feel about the anime, the writing, the actual literature, when it came to the original source, was fucking awesome. And when you think about it like this, how this writer is being mentioned in this series as well, it's crazy. So, we have a bunch of writers throughout this entire series that have some very, very dark literature, but also has some very dark past with their real life. And so, yeah, food for thought there. All the characters have their names based off of famous writers, and all their abilities are based off of their famous works. It's insane. It really is. So I feel like, actually, I was enjoying the episode more for the references than the content. Now, I'm not saying the content was boring. By no means was I saying that. But what I'm getting at is I feel like this episode, or this series, is best appreciated if you are familiar with these characters, or the names in general, the writers. So, I'm just gonna say right now, just to help all of you out that are not, well-versed in all of these different, writers and stuff, I want to link their different, wiki pages in the description. You can check them out for yourself. You can look more into them. It's up to you. It's really up to you if you want to go that extra mile to really dive into these, characters and see who they're based off of. But, I mean, it's a food for thought. It's really interesting in seeing what was going through the writer's mind when they wrote this series, when he decided to choose all these characters. And it might give us, some information to Furycraft on. For instance, maybe some of these characters, for instance, like Dazai, might have something very dark happen to him in the series, because we already see character traits in this episode that was very similar to how Dazai was. For instance, we see similar things in, like, No Longer Human. For instance, Dazai there's a lot of dark history behind him, and I don't want to actually spoil the contents of No Longer Human, so I want to avoid spoilers as much as possible. But the suicidal trait that we saw with Dazai in this episode was very similar to Dazai himself. And when you see that, you're like, oh shit, so if there's a character trait like this, that might mean that other characters in general could be more like their writers, their real self counterparts. And I wonder if the way the character will go will be very similar to how the writers were, or how they died, or something like that. So I'm curious, is Dazai going to do some certain things that happen, in his life that, led him to his decisions and, what many speculate about No Longer Human? So yeah, very curious about that, because, we do see some similar traits to the writer, but I wonder exactly how far those traits will go. But now, besides that, however, what is the concept about besides what I just mentioned? Well, apparently all our characters, regardless of names, are a part of an agency, a special agency that has supernatural abilities, and they're responsible for, dealing with certain issues or problems with others that have, supernatural abilities or things that normally people can't deal with. For instance, you had this, tiger going around and attacking people and eating, regular, crops and animals and stuff, and it was actually our MC that was doing this. At moonlight, when it was, moonlight outside, he would, transform into a tiger, and he would become uncontrollable. He would not remember what he was doing, and so you had it to where, Dazai, he used his ability No Longer Human to be able to stop our MC, and because of this, you have it to where the MC joins their group to become a part of their, private investigation, agency, and that's exactly where the story goes. For the most part, though, majority of this episode was actually, I feel like, fan service for the people that were very familiar with the literature and familiar with these writers. That's what it felt like to me, because if you walked into this episode and you don't know none of these writers, if you don't even get the references, this episode's going to seem very average and boring. I'm not even going to lie. It's going to feel very average. It's going to feel like, it's okay. It's got great animation, but it feels very average. It's nothing spectacular. And at the end of the day, it isn't nothing spectacular at this moment, but with the way these references are and stuff, and the way the writer of the series went that far to do something like that, I'm going to assume that the writer of the series is well versed in this literature, especially dark and tragedy and that type of shit, and this series is going to be rather excellent, because FYI too, if you were unaware, Ashita Sensei, the mangaka of Tokyo Ghoul, Ishida also referenced Dazai in his first chapter of TG. Yeah, he did. Seriously, he really did. Go back to the first chapter of Tokyo Ghoul, and you will see Kaneki mention Dazai. Not even joking. So, yeah, you all have a wonderful day or not wherever you live. It was a fantastic first episode, in my opinion, and I'm definitely going to continue watching it. Please be safe. Chibi out.